Hello and welcome. You're watching To The Point. Yesterday, the government announced a series of reforms raising FDI caps and liberalizing rules. Though widely welcomed, yesterday's announcement has raised two questions. First, was this damage controlled in the wake of Raghuram Rajan's announcement he wasn't available for a second term as governor of the RBI? And secondly, has the government done enough to attract substantially increased inflows of FDI in defence, aviation and retail trade? But there's also a further question that you could ask. Can the government handle the opposition from its own allies like the Swadeshi Jagran Manch and the Bharatiya Mazdoor Sangh? Tonight, my guests are BJP MP Chandan Mitra, former Congress Minister Milind Deora, the editor of the Business Standard A.K. Bhattacharya, Reuters Chief of Bureau in India Douglas Busvine, and the well-known economist, columnist and former Secretary General of FICCI, Rajiv Kumar. Chandan Mitra, let's start with the timing. Most newspapers are convinced that the government's liberalization of FDI in 9 sectors announced yesterday is a major damage-controlled response to the news that Raghuram Rajan is not going to continue as RBI governor. Just look at the Business Standard headline, which perhaps captures this best of all. It says, FDI shower to douse Rajan fire. Would you agree with that interpretation?
Well, you see, financial journalists are often the people least in the know of how policies are made and what ought to be the timing of their release. I think this was something which a herd mentality among the media people yesterday. They all decided day before yesterday that if these FDI measures are coming, they are coming only to kind of douse the impact of Raghuram Rajan deciding not to take a second term. Now, I fail to see how heavens have fallen if Raghuram Rajan has not taken a second term. There have been RBI governors before, there will be RBI governors again, and that the government is going to kind of, its think tank, its strategic thinkers, its great ideological gurus will all sit down in a huddle and say, listen, this guy is about to leave, let's kind of douse him, let's punch him so bad that he won't even look back and have a second thought. I'm sorry, this is not how the way in which governments function. I think it's absolute ignorance on the part of those sections of the media which have been propping up his case and are upset that he has decided to call it quits.
Milind Deora, speaking for your party, the Congress party, Jairam Ramesh said this is a panic reaction. But is that a fair comment? Surely this sort of sweeping set of changes across 9 sectors can't be conjured up in just 24 hours. And secondly, clearly Nirmala Sitharaman had a good point when she said that these were proposals the government was working on for a while. It's just a coincidence that they were announced the day after or 24 hours after Mr. Rajan made clear he was going away.
Well, Karan, firstly, let me make it clear at the outset that I'm not the party's spokesperson, and therefore let me try and take off my Congress hat and speak as a former minister and as a concerned citizen. I think it's a fair point to say that what happened yesterday was a reaction to Mr. Rajan's untimely, forced exit, because there was clearly a strategy by the government to play good cop, bad cop. At one level, there was a lot of provocation from one side, from the BJP. At another level, government spokespersons were saying that we will not allow the party to interfere with our decision whether or not to retain him. And ultimately what happened after the provocation, Mr. Rajan, who deserved an honorable exit, didn't get an honorable exit. And I think that made the BJP and the government of the day look very unpopular in the eyes of the common man, not just industry. And therefore, to offset that, they may have made these announcements.
What about the fact that Jairam Ramesh calls this a panic reaction? Do you believe it is a panic reaction? Do you really believe this sort of set of measures can be put together in 24 hours flat?
Well, you know, Karan, if you actually analyze some of their policies with regards to their proposal to allow single brand retail, their aviation policy, they're not very thought through policies, in the sense, in aviation, for instance, they say that a foreign airline can own 49% in India, where they don't have a controlling share, and 51% can be owned by private equity players who are don't have operational businesses. In effect, what that means is Vistara, which is owned partly by the Tatas and Singapore Airlines, Singapore can increase its stake up to 49%, 51% can be owned by other Singapore funds. So 100% may be owned by the Singapore government, but you're not giving the investor, which is Singapore Airlines, the operator, the freedom to operate in India.
Okay.
I don't think that's going to attract investment. So the policy at many levels doesn't seem very well thought through, which is why I'd like to believe that it might have been a panic reaction and might have been a knee-jerkish way of saying, okay, we're getting a hit over here.
Okay.
People think we're very unpopular for removing this man forcibly. Let's announce an FDI policy, which may not be very well thought through, but it grabs the headlines.
Rajiv Kumar, the Prime Minister's office called this set of measures radical liberalization. A tweet from him said, this has made India the most open economy in the world in FDI. Do you believe that? Or is that a bit of an exaggeration?
Well, it is a bit of an exaggeration, surely, because, you know, the economy is like the US or those in the European Union, or I dare say even China, are even now, despite all of these measures, are equally, if not more open than India. And, you know, there are certain sectors in the services sectors, you know, which are still closed. And my favorite, the multi-brand retail, which is a law at the moment, that, you know, that the FDI is allowed. You know, the government doesn't encourage FDI to come in there. But for me, the big news is that the fear of the foreigner, this ghost which has haunted us since East India Company came and set up its factory in Surat, has finally been sort of exercised, you know, out of the BJP's mind, and that's a big move. Finally, I think it's beginning. The realization has come that foreign direct investment generates jobs here, creates capacities here, and can help us, you know, increase our exports. So I welcome it wholeheartedly. Okay. Whether it is a result of Mr. Rajan's departure or not, I think is not the point at all. Is a moot point. It doesn't matter whether it's come after his departure or before his departure. The fact it has come, I think, is a very good, is a very welcome move on part of the government.
Douglas Basvine, this is a major decision that is really aimed at foreign investors and the outside world. How has it been received in cities like London and New York? Has it begun to change or at least influence the way India is viewed as an investment destination, or is it too early to tell?
Well, I think it's too early to tell, but I think this is part of a series of decisions. It's a continuum. The one that is most striking, I think, for me, is the single brand retail. We remember that Apple CEO Tim Cook was in India recently. He's been looking for an opportunity to open Apple stores, sales a week in China, sales a week in the US. It's evident that the steps being taken on the single brand retail are suitable for Apple to go ahead. I think that's less clear if you look at aviation, civil aviation. That's already been discussed briefly by another guest. But also in defence, the moves are symbolic, they're semantic. The change has gone from state-of-the-art technology to modern technology, if you want to go through the government route to total control of your business. You know, we've got on the record statements from Western defence contractors welcoming this announcement, but when you speak to these people off the record, they shrug. They say we're still trying to find out what this really means for us.
Which is very interesting, because what you're saying is don't go by the statements you read in the press, because those are just being said for public consumption. The truth is they're still trying to work out what this means, whether it's advantageous or whether, as you said yourself, it's just semantics. Have I understood that correctly, Douglas?
Well, I think so. In part, I think there are some substantial announcements there, but it's not a complete package. And coming back to the Rexit, Rajan's decision to withdraw from contention, clearly this amounts to an exercise in seeking to regain control of the economic narrative, to tell the outside world that yes, we are a reformist government, yes, we welcome outside investment, but I think some of those announcements were perhaps more ready than others, and the timing is clearly driven by the political cut and thrust here, but certainly it's an important statement, and as I say, an attempt to regain control of the discussion here.
Sadly, we seem to have lost the line at this moment to the editor of the Business Standard, A.K. Bhattacharya. I very much wanted him to come in because it was his paper that in fact made the point when he said that no one can beat Narendra Modi on timing. But we'll have to leave that for later. Let's look now, Chandan, at where we've got Mr. Bhattacharya. Mr. Bhattacharya, you've come at precisely the right moment. I was quoting from your paper's front page today, which says no one can beat Prime Minister Narendra Modi when it comes to timing. But even if all of this is a response to the RBI governor's impending departure, does it suggest panic, which is what Jairam Ramesh said and which is what, in a sense, Milan Deora supported? Or is it an astute way of fast-forwarding something the government always intended to do so as to strike the right note at the right time? Which of the two?
No, there are two things. One is what you were saying and its reaction. Other is Rajiv Kumar. I think the two are slightly different. What is certainly happening?
No, I'm afraid we don't have the audio to Mr. Bhattacharya. Unfortunately, we will not be able to get that answer. All right, gentlemen, let's come to the specifics to see whether actually they will bring in the sort and quantum of FDI the government's looking for. First, Chandan, on the 29th of April, that's not even 2 months ago, the Defence Minister revealed in Parliament that permitting FDI in defence up to 49% had only brought in 1.12 crore. That's roughly $167,000 full stop. That figure is so small, it's actually laughable. So can you deny that the decision to permit FDI up to 100% is clearly a response to the fact that the earlier opening simply didn't entice anyone at all?
Well, nobody surely expected that minor amount of opening that was given earlier to really allow foreign investment to come in. Now, foreign investment, when it comes in FDI, we have seen from our own experience itself that unless there is something substantial that is given. Now, take insurance as an example. I mean, the bill that
can I stop you there?
Passed, and
Chandan, can I stop you there? Because actually even the insurance figures, as I will reveal in a moment's time, are pitiful. Stick to defence, and I'll tell you why. Because when I interviewed Arun Jaitley after his first budget where he'd opened up defence to 49%, he said with passion, with conviction, that in fact it was more than enough. He said he had already got soundings from people that they were willing to come in. 2 years down the road, we know that just 1.12 crore in rupees has come in. So this wasn't the impression the BJP had when they opened up. I'm saying to you, they've learnt a lesson, but they now have also realized their original opening was so small, it wasn't going to entice anyone.
No, it is obvious that 49%, nobody really wants to come in a big way. Big investments won't come, whether it's defence or any other sector. The investment limit has to go up to 76% at least, and in defence, I think the right thing has now been done, 49% automatic and the remaining on a case-to-case approval basis. Now, this is how it has to be done in every case, and I'm sure that gradually all opening up will happen along this route of 49% plus add on an approval basis.
All right. We've got, I believe, Mr. Bhattacharya back by telephone. Mr. Bhattacharya, we're talking about whether the improvement in FDI in defence, the change laws, the increased permissions, actually will bring in substantial FDI. What's your answer to the question, has the government done enough to entice major arms manufacturers now that they can have up to 100% ownership through government approval? Secondly, the phrase state-of-the-art technology is replaced with modern technology. And thirdly, they've also now included small arms and ammunition in the sector. Will this be sufficient to bring in the major manufacturers? And if it is sufficient, is there secondly, Mr. Bhattacharya, a danger that you could squeeze out Indian manufacturers in the process?
Well, there are two questions that you asked. Number one, I think it's only a matter of time that you will see the result of this defense FDI liberalization of sorts. But it will take some time before these signals actually get emitted and the investors are sure about the policy climate. Now, please remember that what the government has done in the case of defense is that there is a certain element of discretion where an investment above 49% will be allowed. And the definition of state-of-the-art and what is a modern technology, now that will be left to interpretation by the government and the ministry bureaucrats. Now, to my mind, the investor will like more clarity on what is modern technology and what is not a state-of-the-art technology. So I think the government would have done much better if it had clarified the rules with greater certainty and the policies were not made subject to discretion or interpretation by the civil servants.
Okay.
I think a rule-based policy would have been much better to have attracted greater foreign investment.
Now, Milind Deora, A.K. Antony, your former defense minister and speaking for your party, has gone on record to say, and I'm quoting him, allowing 100% FDI in the defense sector means India's defense sector is thrown mostly into the hands of NATO American defense manufacturers. Even if that theoretical fear is actually a genuine fear, isn't it a lot better than importing 70% of your equipment and being the world's biggest importer of defense equipment? At least now, if the equipment is made in India, jobs will be created in India and Indians will have livelihood.
Karan, I don't think when Mr. Antony made that comment, I think he was talking about a larger issue of when you're allowing FDI in defense, for instance, it requires public consultations, political consultations. Mr. Antony, who served in UPA, obviously UPA was pro-encouraging foreign direct investment in defense. We took what George Fernandez left behind in NDA 1 forward. But I do agree with Mr. Bhattacharya's comment that just changing the word from state-of-the-art to modern will ultimately be left to a bureaucrat in the Ministry of Defense in New Delhi to interpret what is modern and what is state-of-the-art and whether they should be permitted to have 100% FDI or not. And it would have helped in a sector where successive governments have tried to reform and liberalize the sector, but have failed in doing so. It would have helped to give much more clarity to investors, foreign investors. But my major concern, Karan, moving away even from defense and aviation, is really what they've done with single brand retail, as Mr. Kumar spoke about and you spoke about when Tim Cook had visited India and they wanted Apple stores to come to India. We're all fans of Apple stores. I personally love Apple stores and love visiting them whenever I travel overseas. But there's a serious concern where once again you have defined cutting edge technologies as a criteria and left it to the discretion of a bureaucrat in the government to decide what is a cutting-edge technology which should be permitted for single brand FDI. For instance, I was former MOS of Telecom and IT, and when I was minister, we actually embarked on a policy to encourage domestic manufacturing in India, electronics clusters, because we're all aware of the figures that in 2020, its import bill for electronics will far exceed its import bill for oil. But today you've removed the local sourcing, making it mandatory. And I'm just concerned that what if tomorrow a Chinese unbranded handset manufacturer, under the aegis of calling itself cutting edge innovation, wrongly interpreted by a bureaucrat, will be allowed to set up a fully owned retail store here with no manufacturing in India? In effect, once again, the Indian consumer is subsidizing the economies of China and Taiwan.
Okay.
And what it's really doing is making this government's Make in India plan go for a toss.
Okay, I
So it's
accept
really
that.
a
You're
concrete
coming up
provision
with a theoretical example whereby the permissions that are given can be abused. Let me go to Rajiv Kumar with the opposite, but still connected to retail. And the opposite is this. The government hopes, Rajiv Kumar, that the changes they are bringing about in single brand retailing, where local sourcing has been waived for 3 years and thereafter relaxed for the next 5, will be sufficient to allow state-of-the-art technology companies to actually set up in India. But the problem is this, the earlier rule arguably was better, because under the earlier rule, actually, local sourcing could have been waived altogether for state-of-the-art technologies. Now, at best, it can be waived for 3 years and reduced or relaxed for the next 5. So here, you could actually argue the law or the rule has been toughened, not relaxed. This is more off-putting than what used to be the situation.
Well, I'm completely unclear on this single brand liberalization thing, because I thought it was already there, and it was under this and under that law that companies like IKEA were already negotiating and had taken the negotiations very far to establish their stores, etc. And so I don't see why this this single brand thing is being touted as a big liberalization. I don't think it is, and as I said in my earlier intervention, I would have much preferred that the multi-brand retail, the FDI multi-brand retail, where India is being left behind and which is going to be a major constraint on the expansion of our trade sector and on employment, that should have been tackled and that should have been addressed right away here. Now, my other big concern, and you've raised this issue with others, is that all of this, the proof of the pudding will be in the eating, and that will not happen until we improve a lot of other allied conditions. For example, the whole taxation regime is frightening away the foreign investors, and we have heard nothing about it. So while all this is very well, and as I said, I welcomed it, there are a number of other things like the ease of doing business, the retrospective taxation, which drove Nokia away, which is producing close to 500 million handsets in their plant near Chennai. All of that needs to be tackled, and the government must now step on the pedal to do that, because the investment sentiment is not yet positive, whether it is for domestic investors or is it for foreign investors. So so this sort of band-aid kind of approach towards liberalization will, I'm afraid, not work at all. And therefore, while welcoming this as I did, I must say that this is probably one of the few necessary conditions, but the sufficient conditions have to be put in place. Otherwise, we'll come a cropper, and then again 2 years down the road, we'll have to take some other steps because we will again realize that this is not done what we had wanted it to do.
Douglas Bazwine, you've heard from Milind Deora that there is so much discretion left in the interpretation of those terms, modern technology versus state-of-the-art. And secondly, it's left to bureaucrats who individually will come up with different interpretations from each other. That is one area of concern for foreign investors. The second is the one I pointed to about retail single brand, where in fact the local sourcing norms, if you argue the way I did, have been toughened rather than relaxed. Now, will all of that, when it's understood, actually put people off?
Well, I think it's evident that the concerns about bureaucratic discretion are front and centre. I mean, regarding whether technology is modern, we're not so sure whether the Defence Ministry bureaucrats will get the memo. I mean, Ajay Shukla was very dismissive of the business standard in a couple of tweets yesterday, and I think he's put it more succinctly in 2 tweets than I could put it. So I think bureaucratic discretion is a big issue. Everyone who wants to invest would prefer a rules-based, clear and simple framework. I think there's no question there. And as for local sourcing norms, I'm sure you're right to point out that this may actually represent a tightening. I think it's worth bearing in mind where the value is here. Apple does not make phones, right? Apple offers an experience, offers software, offers a platform for developers to provide various opportunities for people to do what they want to do. I think Foxconn, which makes its phones, is operating on wafer-thin margins. So for Foxconn to come and transfer manufacturing on a large scale to India is not necessarily putting India far up the value chain. I think it's important for India to be able to make things, but I think the value in an iPhone is not in the making of an iPhone, it's what you can do with it. And I think maybe the policy makers would do well to reflect on that.
and to rethink their position. Chandra Mitra, let's come to one more area before I take a break where the government believes the new rules will actually bring in substantial FDI. I'm talking about permission for airlines to be 100% foreign owned. But within that, as was pointed out by one of our guests, airlines themselves can only own 49%. The remaining 51% has to be owned either by foreign sovereign funds or by private investors. This was a point made by Milan Deora. Now, what makes the government believe that sovereign foreign funds or private investors actually want to set up private airlines in India? Why would they want to do that?
Well, India is among the biggest growing aviation markets in the world. Now look at the number of planes that some of our private airlines have ordered. I mean, I think Airbus and Boeing will be thriving on Indian orders, India and China's orders for the next 20-25 years. So there's no doubt that aviation is growing at a massive pace, and every airline, Indian and foreign, would like to take maximum advantage of this growth. So it's obvious that they will come and they will make investments in Indian existing airlines or in setting up newer ones, and for which the rules have been eased.
Okay.
This is definitely going to lead to more employment to be generated. I don't think there's any doubt in this area at all.
Well, let me put that to Mr. Bhattacharya. Chandran Mitra says the answer is obvious. He says there's no doubt that this will entice people. But let's take the example of Vistara, which is already 49% owned by Singapore Airlines, or if you want Air Asia India, which is already 49% owned by its Malaysian parent. In both cases, the 51% that remains is owned by the Tatas. How will the changes the government announced yesterday make things easier or better for these two airlines?
Well, you know, there are two things that are likely to happen. One, it will give an option to the domestic investor for an exit. I mean, a domestic investor like the Tatas can actually consider exiting or offloading some of its stake in favor of the sovereign wealth fund or some other investor. Now, the second question that will arise from the civil aviation FDI norm liberalization, so to say, is that who will be that sovereign wealth fund? Take the case of Vistara. Now, Vistara has got investment from the Singapore Airlines, and also the Singapore GIC. Can GIC invest and acquire stake in the Vistara? Now, there is no clarity on that, because GIC, after all, has got some relationship with Singapore International Airlines as well. So can GIC be considered a legitimate investor in Vistara? So I think, you know, all these issues need to be clarified, and the government has to come out with a clear set of rules so that the investor can get a clear signal on what the government's intentions are.
Okay, gentlemen, let's take a break at that point. When I come back, I want to turn to what the government hasn't done. Areas where it could have, perhaps where it should have, relaxed the rules and opened up the country to FDI, but it didn't. Was it right not to do so, or was that another mistake? We'll be back in a moment's time. See you for the second half of this discussion. Welcome back. We're discussing the big changes the government announced yesterday in terms of FDI. Gentlemen, let's come to the areas where the government hasn't relaxed the rules and ask whether this was a mistake. Mr. Rajiv Kumar, let's first start with insurance. After the government permitted 49% FDI in insurance, the Finance Ministry's annual report for 2015-16 says that only $385 million have come into the insurance sector. Now, at the time when they opened it up to 49%, the government said they were expecting $2 billion in the first year alone. 2 years later, all we've got is $385 million, which is a fraction. So should the government have done more to invite FDI in insurance?
Well, I think so. I surely think so, and I think they should have permitted this. They can permit up to 76% if they do want Indian partners, and but also I think, again, as I said earlier, it's the rules and the regulations and the procedures that need to be clarified much more and made easier for people to bring in the money, and insurance is one of them. The other sectors, of course, you know, in all the services sector, like the legal services, the printing, the news, the architectural services, all of those are still, you know, closed for FDI, and I don't see why, because again, those are very job-intensive, employment-intensive sectors where Indians will really thrive and benefit from those. So I think, you know, again, as I said, and maybe I'm repeating myself, this, you know, this sort of piecemeal approach to FDI is not going to be enough. And what the government needs to do is to, you know, sort of, make the rules and the procedures transparent and in some sense as clear as possible, so that the foreign investor doesn't see a hurdle road ahead of him, but sees that there is an India which is welcoming, just like I suppose as China did during the early 90s, when they effectively told the foreign investors, come and do what you would like to do here, you got a carte blanche, and we will really close our eyes to what you're practicing here. To some extent, I don't say we should go that far, but to a great extent, we need to become much more welcoming to the foreign investor than what we are today.
Now, Mr. Bhattacharya, the government has permitted 100% FDI for trading, including e-commerce, in food products manufactured and produced in India. However, at the same time, whilst it hasn't reversed permission for FDI in multi-brand retail, it clearly continues to discourage such investment. Is this an area where the government should have rethought its position, or do you believe that the 100% FDI in food retailing provides a backdoor for companies like Walmart and Tesco?
Well, you know, it does make some progress on the issue of FDI in the retail sector, because food is a large chunk in the retail sector. So if you have allowed 100% FDI in the food retail sector, I think you have made a good beginning. But there is no reason why the same principle should be extended to the multi-brand retail sector, because that sector is even more, has got greater potential for job creation. So I think if you want growth with jobs to be generated, I think it is important that you must open up investments, and foreign investment particularly, in these areas. So, I mean, I think it's a very important point. Coming back to I'll just take a minute on the insurance sector. You know, the problem with the insurance sector is this, that while other sectors' FDI norms can be changed through an executive order, in the insurance sector, you need legislative sanction, which means it has to go to Parliament, and both Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha have to agree to those changes. And remember that when BJP was in the opposition, they had stalled reforms in the insurance sector, and therefore, when BJP government goes to Parliament once again with further relaxation in the insurance sector, they're going to face some pushback from the Congress on the same ground as that they were in the opposition, they opposed it. So I think that's a contentious part of the insurance sector reforms as far as FDI is concerned.
Dr. Baswan, I want to explore with you how much potential there is in the 100% FDI permitted in retail trading of food. Marks and Spencer in Britain and Tesco are well known for their food-only outlets in the United Kingdom. Now that they can set up something similar in India, will they want to do so? Or do you think they'll think very carefully before they agree?
The short answer is I'm not sure, but I would say that anything that allows a vertical integration from the farmer's field through to a store and allows a player to remain in control of that process, if that is indeed the intent of this reform, I think would be of interest and could be a sort of a stepping stone to the sort of more ambitious liberalisation of food retailing that may be possible over the longer term. So I think, yes, a vertical integration where control and value addition can be captured by an international player with high standards, I think would be an interesting investment and to the benefit of the consumer. I think sometimes I wonder where the consumer comes in this whole discussion. Surely a more efficient retail sector would benefit the consumer in India, who is coming up pretty short, I think, nowadays, especially in the urban areas where rising living standards, create rising demands as well for quality and standards.
Milind Deora, one area where FDI is not permitted at all is lotteries. But if you look at the way lotteries in the UK or Europe or America raise huge funds for the arts, for sport, for other such worthwhile ventures, and then if you look at the fact that they raise huge tax revenues for the government, has the time come for India to give up its rather Victorian attitude to lotteries and open this sector up as well?
You're asking me more of a political question than an economic one, Karan, but
it's actually more of a moral question than an economic one,
I think at one level we as a country are talking about that's true. But we as a country at some level, while we're talking about liberalizing the economy, allowing more foreign participation in different sectors, at the same time some states in our country are banning alcohol consumption. So I'm not sure which side of the moral compass we're on. But if I can take the discussion a little away from FDI and go back to the last 2 points that Rajiv Kumar had made before the break and right after the break. I think, Karan, for a government that has a majority in the Lok Sabha, the first time in 3 decades of India's history, I think what they announced yesterday was too little, too late. Frankly, beyond just, tinkering with FDI limits from 49% to 74%, 100%, terms which can be interpreted rightly or wrongly by bureaucrats, Mr. Kumar is absolutely right. What about big ticket reforms that this country needs? Ease of doing business, making our taxation system less adversarial than it is today. It's become far more adversarial than it ever was. You see, at least in Mumbai and South Mumbai where I reside, you meet so many businessmen, small families where one family member is leaving India, becoming an NRI. What about disinvestment, for instance? We haven't talked about disinvestment at all. The Prime Minister in his election speeches would always talk about minimum government, maximum governance. For someone like me, as a politician and a lay person as well, I misunderstood that to mean he will make government smaller. But there's been no sign or no push towards disinvestment, towards moving the government out of businesses that it has no right to be in. We still continue to invest, the government continues to invest in companies which are in the consumer space, where they are failing to compete with the private sector. So I think those are the larger reforms that India really needs, ease of doing business. Because ultimately, if we give Indian entrepreneurs, Indian industrialists confidence to invest domestic capital here, they in turn will go out and market India, the India story abroad and bring in foreign capital. But if we do it the other way around, I don't think we're going to fix the problem.
It's very interesting, Chandan Mitra. Milind Deora began by saying that what the government has done is too little, too late. Your allies, the Swadeshi Jagran Manch and the Bharatiya Mazdoor Sangh, are actually saying the opposite. They're saying you've done too much and you've done it too fast. Let me quote the Swadeshi Jagran Manch. This is what they said about yesterday's reforms. It's aimed at snatching away jobs from Indian people. It will sound the death knell for local businessmen. That was the Swadeshi Jagran Manch. Let me now quote to you the Bharatiya Mazdoor Sangh. It's not appropriate to open sectors like defense and civil aviation for FDI. Now these are close allies. They are part of your ideological family. How will you overcome their opposition, or might you buckle under it?
No, Karan, this has been a kind of issue that has been there for a long time. Even when Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee was the Prime Minister, and there were some conflicts with the Swadeshi Jagran Manch and the Bharatiya Mazdoor Sangh over policy matters. Now they are allies, they are our ideological comrades, we work together, we think together, but running a government is a different kettle of fish.
Oh, forgive me. Can I interrupt you there? You cited Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee. Have you forgotten Ram Naik's attempts to privatize or disinvest HPCL and BPCL? He had to give it up, and he had to give it up under pressure from your allies. Might the same thing happen now?
Well, you see, sometimes you have to, no, 1 minute. I mean, if you had allowed me to complete, I would have come to all that.
Go ahead.
The thing is that, you have to sometimes make a few compromises. You win some, you lose some. In certain places you may have to retreat. Some places you make a progress. But we have to take them along. the BMS and the Swadeshi Jagran Manch are part of our ideological family. We cannot abandon them and join hands with all the crony capitalists whom the Congress party has been promoting all these years. So we have to be clear about our objectives, persuade people, make changes in the laws. Like for instance, we still yet don't have an exit policy, and I think exit policy is something for which foreign investors will be demanding before they really put more dollars into the economy.
But you know
now,
what Mr. Modi said to the Wall Street Journal about an exit policy? He said hire and fire are Western concepts. He's distanced himself from the possibility of an exit policy altogether.
Yeah,
you're saying it's essential.
That's exactly what I'm saying. This is exactly what I'm saying. No, I didn't say that. I'm sorry, you didn't hear. Right? I said, can we afford an exit policy? This is the exact word I said. Obviously, we can't. So, we have to work out some in between. The foreigners are going to demand something like an exit policy. We can't give them an exit policy. So, what do we work out in between? Now, these things take time. India's unique situation must be accepted and realized, and we'll work along. I don't think.
In other words, India's unique situation must be accepted. The world will have to make compromises to come to India. We won't make compromises to attract the world. Rajiv Kumar, will that work with the world? After all, it's their money that we want. We're not offering them money. So do we say to them, we're a unique country, you make the compromises to come to us, we won't make any compromises to attract you. Will that work with the world when we want their money? Rajiv Kumar?
I'm afraid...
Yes.
I'm afraid this business of India being too generous is taken too far, it's gone on for too long. India is not too generous. And it is the business of our political leadership to explain to all their allies and all the followers the benefits of the FDI and of opening up and of engaging with the rest of the world, and the fact that this is complete nonsense, that by opening up the defense sector to FDI, Indians will not get the jobs and our jobs will get exported and our Indian businessmen will die, etc., etc. Because it is so much nonsense, I think it is the business of the political leadership of the BJP, and I dare say also of the Congress party, which hasn't done anything either, to go out and put this in the public domain and make it very clear that we are doing this because we want to generate and maximize employment generation. So I think without that intellectual battle being won, without there being a hegemonic stance in the public domain, these things will not happen. These compromises will continue to be made until the cattle come home, and we will stay where we are. And I'm afraid the time is not on our side, because there are 10 million young people joining our workforce every year. And but the fact remains that, like what you said about the food processing thing. No, just one thing is that there are some related acts which have to be tackled, like the Pernicious APMC Act. Unless you remove that, the retailers will not be able to buy directly from the farmers, because that's legally
you
not
have a very good
today.
point, but let me sum up the point you're making in simple layman's language. If you want someone's money to invest in your country, you have to do more than just invite them. You have to make it inviting for them to come. You have to make it something that they want to do. You can't turn around and say, you make the compromises because it's such an honor to come to my country. The attitude has to be very different. Otherwise, they'll keep their money and go somewhere else with it. My thanks to all my guests for joining me, and my apologies for the trouble that you had with Mr. Bhattacharya's time. If you have been, thanks for watching. Goodbye. Good night.